Les, when we left on to the break a while ago, we were talking about catastrophic injuries. But one of the things that we just surfaced over there was a traumatic brain injury. We commonly refer to that as a TBI.
Right.
But what most people don't realize, it can also be a hidden injury as well.
Very much so.
And I know that you have dealt with a lot of cases over the last couple of years where some of our clients have suffered a TBI, and it's very lasting, and it's hard to kind of describe that to someone who's not walking in that person's shoes.
Sure. The most common traumatic brain injury really that we deal with on a fairly regular basis is concussion. Right. People, you get hit, your head gets rattled around, you get rear-ended, your head goes back, hits the headrest, T-boned, it kind of does this circular type of thing. Concussions are very common. We mostly associate those with sports, obviously, which football, baseball, basketball, things like that. But a concussion is, by definition, a mild traumatic brain injury. Right. Now, the thing with traumatic brain injury is, like Chris said, it's a hidden injury. You don't really know about it unless you get in to talk to somebody about it, or they tell you certain things. I've got headaches, or I'm seeing spots, or my vision is blurry. I've had people tell me that things taste differently. I'm tasting more salt. I mean, it's really kind of odd how they manifest themselves, but there's different ways that a traumatic brain injury can manifest themselves. Sometimes we deal with major or moderate to major traumatic brain injuries, and even in those types of cases, how do you diagnose it? Well, I've had cases where people have had MRIs, they've had CT scans. And everything looks normal. The brain looks normal. There's no what they call a midline shift where the brain is slid over from one side to the other. There's no bleeding, there's no swelling, but they're demonstrating signs of traumatic brain injury. And so in that sort of a situation, what we do is we send them off to what's called neuropsychological testing. And what it is, it's a battery of tests that people go through. And it tests the way your brain processes things. It tests everything from your memory, long-term memory, short-term memory, processing, problem-solving type things, and then based on this battery of tests, it can show you where the deficits are in your brain activity. But the way when we're typically building up a traumatic brain injury case, we want to get that baseline testing, because most people don't go into an accident with a brain injury and say, oh yeah, by the way, here's my neuropsych testing from 2 years ago that shows I'm perfectly normal. So you have to build a baseline first. You start off with their educational records, their college, high school records, things like that. You start your battery of tests, you find out where the deficits are, and then after 12 to 18 months, things start to level out, and you do another battery of tests. And you can measure the improvement, and then what you're left with, the deficit, is really kind of your brain injury. But I said all that gobbledygook and all just to say this. It's a process. Right. Again, just like the trucking case, just like when you're building the case from the ground up with the evidence and the surveillance, a traumatic brain injury is the same thing. You've got to build the case from the ground up, which is another reason to get a lawyer involved very early, because we're trained to know those sorts of things and how you build a case like that.
So just got a text message about a TBI issue, and it basically, the question is what happens when that person thinks that they're okay and they still want to make the decisions on their case, but knowing good well the attorneys know that they're not competent to make that decision.
Yeah.
Walk us through that process.
Yeah, those are kind of difficult when people think they're okay. And it's not just in TBI cases. We see that a lot with, obviously elderly people. Sure. They think I'm perfectly fine. I can drive. Mm-hmm. I can do this just fine. And the next thing you know, they're in their car and they left their keys inside. Yeah. It's a very difficult thing to do. If as a practitioner, if I see somebody that doesn't look like they have the capacity, first thing I'm doing is I'm talking to the family members. Right. But at some point, you may have to get the court involved. And to get the court involved, you have to have a competency hearing. There has to be medical documentation. You have to have the person evaluated by a physician. You have family members weigh in. This is what mom's saying. This is what dad's saying. This is what they're doing. This is what they're forgetting. And then there's a determination by the judge. And if the judge says, look, with all due respect, we don't think you're able to make certain decisions on your own, you can have a guardianship set up for somebody to make those decisions for them. But that's a very difficult, a very sensitive process.
Yeah, and that guardianship, it's the oversight's by the court.
Right.
And it is locked down basically like Fort Knox. It's a very protective procedure, and it's a way to make sure that someone's their assets are secure, their decisions are made on their best interest. And you know, there's a lot of times that individuals fight that, and it's hard to let somebody know that you have to have somebody to help you make some very, I guess, you know, everyday decisions that you would consider easy, and this person's struggling to make.
And those are they're very tricky because, like you said, a lot of times people want to fight it. Even though the guardianship process, everything is always done in the best interest of the ward or the individual. You know, we say ward like a child, but sometimes people, they don't have the capacity for it. You know, capacity matters when it comes to making decisions, but also matters when it comes to things like making a final decision on settling a case or making a decision on whether do I sign this release or not. You know, that's one of the things as practitioners, you know, if we've got somebody with a brain injury, you know, we're always going through those extra steps to say, look, you know, Your Honor, this person has a brain injury, we want to sign this, is it okay? You always want to make sure you have that judicial blessing over those sorts of things, because sometimes that can come back to bite you if you're not careful about it.